Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, sponsored by the law firm of DeMarco and DeMarco PC. I am your host, Larry DeMarco. In the last episode, we discussed how the media influenced public policy and behavior and showed the negative political, social, and economic consequences of its influence. Even Delaware County local newspapers aren't immune from the influences of advertisers. In this episode, I will focus on the negative effects the media's had on our local elections. I want to say that I do like our local paper and its editor. What I don't like about Delaware County election coverage is a result of the one-party system we have here and how a dominant political party, currently the GOP, can influence the press. The Republican Party's dominance in Delaware County goes back over 100 years and is reflected in the voter registration. Whereas recently, as 1998, the Republicans had approximately a 40 percentage point advantage over the Democrats. In 1998, there were almost 226,000 Republican registered voters to 99,000 registered Democratic voters out of a total of almost 357,000 registered voters. The voter registration has leveled off in recent years, and the Democrats now have a 5 percentage point advantage over the GOP. In 2016, there were 189,000 registered Democrats to 171,600 registered Republicans out of a total of almost 413,000 registered voters. However, the Republican Party has totally dominated county politics the entire time. On October 25th, 2015, right before the general election, the editor ran a story in the Delco Times discussing the GOP dominance and its reasons. He wrote that even though there are more registered Democrats than Republicans, and they have been making gains in some local municipalities, still there is one fortress that they have been unable to dent. That would be the media courthouse, where the Republican Party continues to rule with an iron fist. I don't see that changing on November 3rd, in no small part because, while Democrats now like to talk about that voter registration edge, it's Republicans who actually go to the polls. In a non-presidential year, voters likely will continue to stay away in droves, so he predicts a Republican sweep. The Delco Times failed to cover a story where only a few weeks ago there was an illustration of the imbalance of power between the Delco GOP political machine and the Democratic Party. In the fall of 2015, a Republican-controlled courthouse granted a petition in favor of a Radnor Republican candidate, whereas in the spring of 2015, the court declined to extend the same courtesy to the Democrats. The media had an easy opportunity to inform the voters of an unequal application of the law by the government on the eve of an election, neglecting one of its most solemn duties. That is the role of a watchdog journalist, to be a protector or guardian to prevent the abuse of power. Such a comparison should awaken voters to a government without a balance of power or checks and balances. The Delco Times' failure to cover this story is a prime example of how our local media, Delco Times, manufactures the consent of the public on behalf of the government, the ruling class. Often the biggest story is the one that's not reported. In 2015, the story of the election is that two almost identical election petitions were presented to the county courthouse in a politically charged atmosphere between Democrats and Republicans. Both times, the rulings were issued in favor of the Republican Party and against Democratic candidates from a courthouse employing almost exclusively Republican employees. The news media declined to report a comparison of the rulings, although they were acutely aware of the facts and its significance. No Democrat has ever been elected to county judge in Delaware County. Also, no Democrat has been elected to county council since the 1970s, when the county home rule charter required minority representation. In the spring of 2015, the Democratic county council candidates had a technical defect in their nominating petitions, so the Republican Party had a friendly Democrat file a petition challenge to knock all the candidates off the ballot. Litigation followed, and Manley Parks was the attorney who represented the Democratic candidates. He described what happened.
So what happened on that day was that our folks went over with these petitions to get them filed, and you also have to file a statement of financial interest with the petition, which is something a candidate has to submit that discloses, for example, what bank holds their mortgage, and so you know who they might be beholden to financially. What became important for this piece of litigation was that these folks who hadn't engaged in this filing experience before went to the Bureau of Elections. They were told, oh, you have to go pay the filing fee. So they went around, they paid the filing fee, they brought the receipt back, and they then handed them a copy of each candidate's petition. They handed a copy of the receipt showing that the filing fee had been paid, and they handed a copy, or they handed them the statement of financial interest. Now what they did is they filed the original statement of financial interest, not a copy, with the nomination petitions as part of the filing package. And Ms. Hagan accepted the submissions and stamped them as received, and the folks left believing that they had successfully accomplished their mission. After the original of the statements of financial interest got filed with the nomination petitions in that instance, a determination was made that the filing was not proper and that these candidates were going to be removed from the ballot. And we challenged that, and we argued that there was no deficiency because the fact that an original was filed rather than a copy is a de minimis and insignificant error, if you want to even call it that. And the point of the rules is to make sure that the statement of financial interests are filed and publicly available, and they were. It was just that it was an original, not a copy. So we ultimately ended up in court in a battle over whether the name should be stricken from the ballot or not.
Was it filed at the right location? Did it have to go to the Prothonotary rather than the Bureau of Elections?
Yeah, that is essentially where the original should have been filed.
However, it's the same courthouse.
Same courthouse down the hall, and importantly, from the perspective of public disclosure, the Bureau of Elections had the statement of financial interest,
which is where it would go from the Prothonotary.
Well,
they would take it to the Bureau of
Elections.
Elections.
Both places. You would file the original with the Prothonotary, and you take a photocopy of what you filed with the Prothonotary and walk it down and attach it to your package of materials that you're filing with the Bureau of Elections. So they get a copy of it. They just don't get the original. So it essentially was, to me, an insignificant technical defect that didn't really harm anyone because it was on file with the government, and there wasn't like it wasn't ever filed and we're trying to file it later or something like that. It was filed and it was in the hands of the county government. The original shouldn't have been filed with the Bureau of Elections of the county. It should have been filed with the Prothonotary of the county, and that became the issue. Ultimately, the court unfortunately ruled that the rules are clear and that they didn't accept the technical defect argument.
As Manley Parks explained, the judge granted the Republican Party's petition to knock the Democrats off the primary ballot, and the Democrats were required to launch an expensive and momentum-draining write-in campaign. This was a dramatic and significant decision, and it defined the 2015 county election season. Although David Landau gave an official quote for the newspaper at the time this occurred, crying foul, stating that this is an example of what happens with one-party rule, Manly Parks gave a more detailed explanation of the Democrats' perspective.
There are fingers to point at the Democratic Party if you want and say, well, the rules are the rules and you should figure them out and do it the right way. And I hear that, I suppose, at some level, but here's what bothers me. These people in these offices are public servants. They are to serve the public. They're not there to serve one political party or another. If they want to do that, go get a job as treasurer of the Republican Party of the county or Democratic, some Democratic Party position. But when you are doing the job of working in the Bureau of Elections and accepting filings from people, whether they're official Democratic Party endorsed candidates or a person off the street who's running as an independent, if you go to the DMV and they acted that way and said, well, you just take your best guess at what you need to give me to get your license, and I'll accept it, and later I'll tell you whether you get your license or not, as opposed to saying, oh, it looks like you forgot this form, or make sure you fill out, don't forget to sign, oh, it looks like you didn't check this box, do you mean? It would be outrageous. And it's no less outrageous when that happens in the Bureau of Elections at the county, as opposed to the DMV or some other. I mean, these offices exist to help people accomplish what they want to accomplish through government, whether it's file for a new driver's license or a name change or something, or file to be a candidate. And
Certainly.
No one's asking. The position of the county, official position was, well, that's giving legal advice. And I say, that's ridiculous. It's not legal advice to say, oh, this original that you're giving me, that actually should go down the hall. Do you have a photocopy to leave with me? That's all that had to happen to prevent this whole thing.
As a reaction to the incident, the Delco Times ran a commentary from the editor. Should the forms be changed, or at least made more clear as to the requirements for candidates? Probably, although it never seemed to be a problem before. We've often joined Democrats in bemoaning one-party rule in Delaware County. This is not one of those times. Instead, this is more a case of one-party ineptitude, and it's not the Republicans. The Democrats have no one to blame but themselves. Now they set their sights on a write-in campaign, and deservedly so. So, the courthouse, the Republican Party, and the press have spoken. The game is going to be called tight. Any mistake, fatal. And according to the editor of the Times, that's the way it should be. No bending the rules. You break the rules, you face the consequences, however expensive the cost. According to Manly Parks, it was a six-figure expense for the Democrats.
Do you have any knowledge as to the cost of what that took to do the write-in campaign?
I can say this, it was 6 figures.
Later that same year, in Radnor Township, a Republican candidate for school board withdrew beyond the time when the rules allow a replacement candidate. In replacing their candidate after the election began, the Republican Party bent the rules, arguably worse than the Democrats did in the spring, and it cost the taxpayers money. A Republican courthouse appeared to show a different standard to its own political party than it showed a rival political party, the Democrats. The Delco Times issued no commentary like it did when the Democrats made a minor mistake, and no editorial about the Republicans deliberately breaking the rules and getting away with it, and no analysis about the apparent unequal application of law for the voters to consider at election time. Later that same year, in Radnor, a Republican candidate for school board withdrew weeks before the general election and 17 days after the deadline. Attorney George Beatty told the story.
One of the Republicans in late September got a different job and decided that she didn't want to run or couldn't run and wanted to take her name off of the ballot. Under state law, you can only remove your name from the ballot more than 85 days out from the election. So I thought to myself, wow, the judge in that case in March was so technical that he threw Democrats off the ballot. I can't imagine that a judge is going to allow the Republicans to take somebody off the ballot that's already been voted for, because the Bureau is going to have to print new ballots. They're going to have to mail ballots to people that voted. People are going to have to vote twice. It's just something to me that there's no way, especially after what they did to the Democrats in the spring, that the judge is going to allow the Republicans to get away with this. So I felt confident going in that, and I made the argument to the court, look, it was a really tight strike zone before. Call it a fair strike zone. If you treat both parties equally, there's no way they're going to be allowed to do this. And unfortunately, the judge ruled that the Republican candidate in Radnor could remove her name, even though the ballots had been printed. And the new candidate was allowed to put her name on the ballot, even though ballots had already been printed. And the Bureau of Elections was ordered to send new ballots to all the voters that had voted so that they have an opportunity to vote twice. And if they returned that second ballot, their first ballot would be discarded. And then as a final insult, as a final slap in the face to the taxpayers of Delaware County, I asked the court, I said, I understand your ruling is what it is, but would the court consider making the Republican Party pay for the costs of all the reprinting and all the mailing that will be incurred? Because the Democrats had to incur all those costs of the write-in campaign, and I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe we lost this thing. At least the Republican Party should pay for it. And the judge said, nope. So in effect, the taxpayers did that. The taxpayers paid for the Republicans to do what they did.
The mainline media news reported the story. When George Beatty was asked for a statement, he requested that his letter to the editor sent by email be published in its entirety. They did publish his email, but the news did not otherwise contrast the incidents in the spring and the fall. The Delco Times also covered the Radnor election, but it failed to mention the spring County Council petition challenge in its story. In addition, it only published a portion of George's email out of context when he was talking about Delco GOP absolute power, but they did not give his detailed explanation. The email read,
people should know that there are 67 counties in Pennsylvania. 66 of 67 counties, all but one, have mandatory minority party representation. Delaware County is the only county in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that has unanimous all Republican representation. We have 5 members of county council, all 5 are Republican. In Philadelphia, for example, the Philadelphia City Charter requires of the 7 at-large council members, at least 2 of the 7 have to be from a minority party. So there's always some Republicans in Philadelphia city government. Also, every county in the whole state except Delaware County. So in our county, we have all 5 Republican county council members. We have a register of wills, the controller, the sheriff. They're all Republicans, and we have 20 judges as well as some senior judges. Every single judge in Delaware County is a Republican.
in the rest of the email, which Mr. Beatty had requested that be printed in its entirety, he explained in much more detail the comparison between the two rulings.
I mean, how I saw it in the spring when the Democrats were on the line and they filed the form, but not with both offices, only with one office, the government had that form, and yet he still called strike three and threw them all out. The strike zone was huge. The pitch was like way over the batter's head, and he called it strike three. Boom, you're out. That's rough. And now in late September, you know, this is right down the middle. They shouldn't be allowed to do this. He called it a ball, or she. There are different judges.
If you recall, precedent had been set for this election in the spring by the Republican Party and the court. You make your bed, you lie in it. Defects are fatal. After you get bounced by mistake or withdrawal, you have to write your candidate in. even if you had only made a small technical defect like the Democrats did in the spring. Mistake, you're out. In addition, the Delco Times issued commentary, lest we forget. However, after the Republicans removed their own candidate against the rules, 17 days, no less, no similar commentary by the Delco Times editor was made. After the court issued the inconsistent decision against the Democrats in favor of the GOP, the same party in complete control of a county courthouse, the Delco Times was notably silent. The only comment the newspaper made is that the GOP voters are more likely to come out and vote. The media, meant to be a watchdog of the government for a working democracy, was silent regarding any comparison or contrast of these election rulings. This 2015 election coverage by the Delco Times is a prime example of how the media manufactures the consent of the voters on behalf of the ruling class. We don't know why the Delco Times didn't compare the petition results and blame the Republicans for its Radnor deadline blunder the same way it blamed the Democrats for its petition error. Was it not to jeopardize its ad money from Republican businesses? Was it not to risk being frozen out of news stories? Does the Delco Times more closely identify with the GOP? We don't know. We only know what the editor says about the election results. Some things just don't change in Delco. It's nice to see some things don't change. The GOP continues to rule the Delco courthouse with an iron fist. The incumbent GOP candidates easily cast aside their Democratic challengers. What's going to happen first, he asks. The Eagles win a Super Bowl, or Democratic candidates be elected to county council? His money is on the birds. In case you don't follow football, the Eagles haven't won a national title since 1960. The Delco Times has reported that the GOP has 100% control of the judiciary, 100% control of county council, and about 100 years of control of the courthouse. However, it's neglecting its watchdog duties in failing to report conflicts of interests and potential abuses of power. Did a potential injustice occur in 2015? Either the Democratic Party wrongfully incurred an expensive write-in campaign, or the taxpayers wrongly paid for a replacement candidate for the Republican Party and the expense of having to cast votes a second time. But because of the media's propensity to manufacture Delaware County's voters' consent, the voters never asked this question at the 2015 election. What goes on in Delaware County that remains unknown? What other stories are unreported? Skeletons are buried and injustices are carried. Send your stories to LarryDeMarco4@gmail.com. And remember, if you like this story, make sure you like, follow, share Delaware County politicalnews.com, and tune in for my next episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.